Hello and welcome to The Ownership Effect. I'm your host, Jim Bonham. Our guest today is Brian Bowers, CEO of Bowers Kubota, a construction management, architectural, and engineering firm in Honolulu, Hawaii. Brian's story offers a rare inside look at what it means to sell a company to employees and to stand behind that decision through both extraordinary success and some serious challenges. Since becoming an ESOP, Bowers Kubota has delivered significant long-term value to its employee owners and become a prime example of what ESOPs can achieve when culture, governance, and purpose are all aligned. Brian also shares his experience navigating and winning a lengthy Department of Labor investigation and lawsuit, an experience that has helped shape the national discussion and debate about ESOP regulation. It's a candid conversation about ownership, accountability, and why getting public policy right matters for the future of employee ownership. We've got with us today Brian Bowers of Bowers Kubota, which is based in Honolulu, Hawaii. Welcome to the show, Brian.
Yeah, thank you, Jim. Glad to be here.
Thanks for making the trip and for visiting with us. So I always like to start out by having you describe a little bit about yourself and the company that you founded and that you work for.
I was lucky enough to get a scholarship to West Point, so I graduated from the military academy and then went on into the Army. My first duty assignment, I was lucky enough to be stationed here in Hawaii and served on active duty for 6 years actually, at various locations, to include Fort Belvoir, right outside here. And then decided that I didn't want to be on active duty anymore. It wasn't necessarily I guess, the environment for me to raise a family. And so we moved back to Hawaii and have been here ever since. I stayed in a kind of a dual career. So I stayed in the Army Reserve, so I was still able to serve, which I thought was an important part of my life. And then I joined what was really the predecessor to Bowers Kubota. And so then my partner and I, Dexter Kubota, so I joined that in 1987. He joined in 1989. And as that company was kind of faltering, we kind of rebranded it and restarted it as Bowers Kubota.
And what does Bowers Kubota do?
They are an architectural engineering firm, and we're very proud that we're right now the largest architectural engineering firm that's locally based in Hawaii. About 320 people, full-time employees.
And at what point did you and your partner start thinking about your exit strategy as business owners? And how did you become aware of selling to your employees through an ESOP as an option?
As we started to look into it, effectively there's really only 4 ways to exit a privately held company. And, I'll go from, worst to best scenarios. You can close it down. And we had witnessed some small engineering firms that had, that really didn't have an exit strategy. And they had to really close the business. And that's not good for the community. That's not good for their employees. And it's really not good for the owner either, because, they don't get anything. And then there was to look internally to sell it to your, maybe the future leaders or some kind of family sale or something. I think that works for smaller companies. And, the vast majority of architects and engineers really nationwide are, 20 or less or something like that. By that point, when we were looking at this, we were a little bit larger, and that didn't really work out. And then the third option, which, some companies are doing, private equity now is, certainly in that space for architects and engineers, that really didn't work for us in terms of the culture and what it was going to, do to our employees. We had by that point, we were around 100 people, and we had very much embraced this idea of, really leaning into employee engagement. And we did that through, at one time, not one time, still is, being a Hawaii best place to work. And then from that, we leveraged that into a national best place to work. And we've been very, happy, proud, grateful that we've been, a best place to work both locally and nationally for the last about 15 years. In fact, number one the last few years in both those categories, both locally and nationally. So that really didn't work for us. And then there was this, kind of fourth option, which was an employee stock ownership plan. And that very much resonated with Dexter Kubota and myself. as the two shareholders, because it allowed us to keep the culture and organization intact and continue to align, the management's goals with the employees' goals. The idea that if you became 100% employee-owned company and were an S corporation, then you effectively would become a tax-free entity. And that was, a huge benefit, we thought, for the long-term growth and sustainability of the company. So this was an option that we really hadn't looked at, but we embraced it, almost immediately. And, we were already, I would consider, a very successful company, basically, leaning into this idea of, that employee engagement is important for us. So I think we already had the foundation for a successful ESOP because, as employee owners, you want that engagement. We had several employees that were concerned as, hey, I don't quite understand this ESOP. We have this great, profit sharing plan, and, now we're going to restart the vesting, and it was really the older employees. And I don't see how this is going to be, more beneficial to me. And, my counsel at the time was, because I had done some investigation, was, just wait and see. And, if you were to go back and ask those employees, let's fast forward, 13 years later, we did this in 2012, it was a 100% transaction, they would say, Brian, you were right. It's, been extremely beneficial for our employees.
When you did the original valuation and the independent appraisers came back, can I ask, what was the share value?
It was a little over $6. That was with a leveraged transaction.
So at that point, $6 per share that then gets sold to the ESOP trust, and over time that gets the debt to acquire those shares gets paid back. What's the value at most recently?
The value of the shares as of December 31st, 2024 was over $150 a share.
So what's that multiple? I mean,
About
that's
25.
125%.
No, 25
25
times.
times.
25
more.
times, yes.
And that's between 2012 and now.
14, really.
14 years. 2014, 2014 and now. I mean, that's an amazing return for any investor. And the employees themselves don't actually put any money into the ESOP.
That's correct. It's a fully funded employer plan, which is why, since joining, the association and becoming more involved in the ESOP association, I'm trying to, educate other companies and really our own people is that this is a fully funded retirement plan for you. You're not putting in any money at all. And we have people now leaving with, 7-figure retirements.
It's amazing. It's amazing. Now, this hasn't all been a bed of roses for you. And one of the real challenges that ESOP founders face is that the deal can get scrutinized, and it gets scrutinized by the Department of Labor. And you got what we sort of affectionately call the love letter, which is the Department of Labor looks at the transaction and they send you a letter and they say, we would like to come in and take a closer look at the sales transaction. And that led to a pretty lengthy bit of investigation and litigation. You want to maybe walk us through that just a little bit? Because, you as an individual probably have had more of an impact on improving the regulatory environment for ESOPs than any single person currently in the ESOP space.
No, that's very kind. Of course, it doesn't come without the scars, but that comes with the territory. But yeah, it was anything but a love letter. Probably just the opposite. But now I understand what you're saying. So yeah, so our transaction occurred in late 2012. In 2014, we got what you call the letter from the Department of Labor, EBSA, that they wanted to do an investigation of our transaction. And, what was curious was, we didn't find out this till much later, was that we were really scrutinizing, or not scrutinizing, they were looking at firms in Hawaii. And as we found out through deposition and discovery later during the litigation, was that the office in LA the senior supervisor there had told the investigator who was investigating us, go find some ESOPs in Hawaii to look at. And so, I mean, that doesn't sound very empirical or I don't know, just almost random. And so they chose us because it was, I think, one of the larger transactions, that had happened in 2012. At that time, I said about 100 people or so. And so we got that letter, and then over the course of, he came in and, talked to us, talked to our valuation person, talked to our accountant, and this was in early 2015. And, he left saying, okay, this looks all pretty good. The valuation, looks reasonable. And so then, okay, that's kind of over. But then over the course of the next approximately 2 years, he would ask for additional things. Can you send us a copy of your insurance policy? Can you send us your latest valuation? Which, of course, we did. We did everything they asked him. What would be interesting is he wouldn't do anything for about 6 months, and then he'd say, "Can I have this by tomorrow?" And okay. So, but
Where have you been?
yeah, yes. So we fully cooperated up until during this investigation, but it was never really closed. And then in late 2017, so this was about maybe 3 years after that. So we went through about a period of about 3 years of this, them asking for things and we providing it. They asked for a tolling agreement, which I didn't even know what that was at the time. I have since, become very educated in it. And that was because they were getting near the statute of limitations for.
So a tolling agreement is basically, the Department of Labor has a certain amount of time by which they have to complete any investigations or any scrutiny. And if they don't, reach a conclusion by that deadline, then it's game over. So they came to you with an agreement saying, hey, will you voluntarily extend our statute of limitations?
Yes, because they were bumping up against that. And I think it's 5 years.
But they didn't exactly put it that way.
No.
They sort of said, well, you'll either extend the amount of time we have or we're going to sue you.
That's correct. Right. That pretty much was it.
And you kind of, you said, well, great, sue me.
Actually, not the first time. That was the second time.
Okay.
Yes. Okay. So this was in October, and we got legal advice that says, hey, maybe you can work this out. Why don't you sign it? Looking back on that, I would advise any company that goes through that now not to do it because, there is no benefit for you because they're probably going to sue you anyway. Now, I can't say that now with, some of the new people in there, but certainly back then, if I knew what I did today, I'd have said, okay, start, just go ahead. And so we signed that, extended for, I think it was 90 days. And then they came back to us again in the spring and said, will you sign this again? And I just said, no, we're not going to sign that. And I want to say maybe a week later, they dropped a complaint on us. It was April of 2018.
And you went through the whole process. And, at that point, you had provided all of the information and you guys did everything right. I mean, let's be really clear. You did everything right. You had the appropriate independent valuation. You provided all of the data, all of the information, and your number was not only was it correct, but it was probably even a little bit more conservative than it should have been. You get to trial, and what does the judge say?
The judge basically said, and this is okay. So now fast forward. This is 2018. Fast forward to 2021. So this is 3 years of discovery. And during that 3 years, the Department of Labor changed litigation teams several times. They actually got hit with over $100,000 of sanctions for uncooperativeness, which I'm told is very unusual in these cases. And so we go to trial, and they tried to get us to settle until the last minute. Our trustee, I should probably add that, the trustee who was responsible for the transaction actually passed away 6 months after the complaint. And as we found out, certainly the trustee is the one responsible. That's why, as a shareholder, as a board of directors, you hire that independent trustee. As you said, we did everything right for knowing the rules at the time, which, there really wasn't a lot of rules according to the Department of Labor because they hadn't finalized them. But they were really investigating him and his numerous transactions because it was a new philosophy by EBSA where they were targeting professionals as opposed to individual companies. Yeah, so they were actually looking at his whole portfolio. He passed away soon after the litigation was filed, and so then they kind of turned their attention from the trustee to us. You can't sue a dead person, although they did try because they added his widow to the complaint. But yeah, by the time we go to trial, she had decided to settle with the Department of Labor. And so, we were kind of left standing by ourselves there. And we went to trial and after a 5-day bench trial, the soundbite is the district court judge at the time in Honolulu said the Department of Labor, EBSA, had no evidence. Specifically, if I remember, the exact quote is, not for lack of trying, but for lack of evidence, this, case failed.
So that leaves you with total victory, but you still had to pay all of those legal fees and defend your reputation and defend the company for all of those years. Now, my fear in telling the story is that, there may be founders out there that hear this and like, oh my gosh, I don't want to go through that. But here's the silver lining. And that's that the experience that you went through and your willingness to stand forward and broadcast, this is what my company went through. And this is why the regulatory approach of the past departments of labor is inappropriate, is causing real change here in Washington. Because there are so many members of Congress who completely agree that the Department of Labor's behavior was outrageous. And in fact, this summer, legislation passed through the Senate, the full Senate, and now through the House Education and Workforce Committee, and it's pending in the full House of Representatives. At every stage, it's passed unanimously to very clearly define what that process should look like to establish that fair market value. And I can say without a doubt, being a person in the arena helping to get this legislation passed, the story of Bowers and Kubota is one of the biggest catalysts to propel that legislation forward on such an overwhelming bipartisan basis. And in the Department of Labor itself, with the new leadership there, we're very confident that the regulatory environment for ESOPs is improving dramatically. And just on behalf of the ESOP community and employee owners nationwide, I just want to say thank you for what you did and the leadership that you demonstrated in standing up. Because sometimes that's what it takes is a citizen willing to stand up to government and saying, enough, this is not appropriate. It's an abuse of power. So thank you for doing that.
I appreciate that, Jim. And I think I had said at one of the conferences that it was actually surprising me that no one had ever done that before, and we were the first ESOP in, I don't know, decades, 20, 30, 40 years that had went all the way to trial and actually won. And all along, my mantra was, we didn't do anything wrong, so why should we settle? And the Department of Labor made it kind of easy because they were being unreasonable through the whole process. And when we went to trial, I had not heard anything through mounds of deposition and hours of deposition that said we did anything wrong. And what was interesting was I called them hired gun mercenary person that had come up with a valuation to kind of counter ours. When you added back all the mistakes and
their own errors,
adjustments, that actually was a higher valuation than what we had actually gotten. To your point earlier that maybe it was conservative, probably was a little conservative, but that's okay. But and the judge, to her credit, recognized that that was basically the linchpin of this litigation was was the valuation correct or not? And we had 3 people that said it was probably a little conservative, and then when you adjusted theirs, now that was a 4th one. So their case basically crumbled under its own weight.
The real winners here have been your employees. You were given a recognition last year by the association for your work, and when we were preparing to give you that award, we had the chance to talk to some of your employees, and what they had to say about the company and about you was really, it was beyond heartwarming. But what has been the impact of selling your company to your employees? What has it meant for some of those individual employees?
I think it, like any new something that's a change, they're usually going to be, resistant to change. But, as they look back over the last 12 years, and now that we're getting, into the point where long-term employees who are over 55 and have 10 years are taking the diversification, and they're pulling out, literally generational wealth, from this at only 25%. And then those that are retiring, are able to retire, earlier than they thought, because this is a huge amount of money that's going to be paid out, in basically, up to 5 years. And it's really had an impact on them. And it's become a great recruiting tool for us. We're creating, something that's going to last well beyond myself or Dexter Kubota. And you're rewarding the people that help, build it with you, which is, I think, unique.
That's the ownership effect. So thank you, Brian, for joining us today. And thank you for everything you've done for the ESOP community and for your employee owners. And I can't tell you how much I look forward to working with you in the future.
Thank you, Jim. Pleasure to be here.
Thanks. Thanks for listening to today's episode. And if you like the podcast, please remember to subscribe and rate us on your favorite podcast player and our YouTube channel. We'll see you next time on The Ownership Effect.